Hello, and welcome to my second attempt at Frost and Filigree Live. I unfortunately read three whole chapters and it was all lovely. And then I went back to listen to it, and apparently I had set up my sound incorrectly, but have a slightly new setup here and tested it ahead of time. So hopefully that will make all the difference in the world. Um, Now, once again, if you're not familiar, my name is Natanya Barron, and I am an author. And I just released the second in my novella series, Frost and Filigree. Um, the first novel is about a bunch of monsters who are actually heroes, and the second book follows them to Cairo. And it's fun and rollicking and meant to be enjoyable. And sometimes in this day and age, we just need something a little bit more lighthearted and fun. So I thought, in the spirit of sharing and fun, since I had a little bit of time on my hands, I might go ahead and do some reading. So thanks for those who are joining in, and I appreciate you with your patience of coming through a second time. But once again, the book is called Frost and Filigree, and I will be reading the first three chapters. Uh, and the book is dedicated to the women who live wild. I met a full sorry, one more time. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. From La Belle Dame Sans Merci by John Keats. She was a Gordian shape of dazzling hue, vermilion spotted, golden, green, and blue, striped like a zebra, freckled like a pard, eyed like a peacock, and all crimson barred, and full of silver moons that as she breathed dissolved or brighter shone or interwreathed their lustres with the gloomier tapestries. So rainbow-sided, touched with miseries, she seemed at once some penanced lady elf, some demon's mistress, or the demon's self. From Lamia by John Keats. You're a woman with a brain and a reasonable ability. Stop whining and find something to do. The Dowager Countess of Grantham. Chapter 1, Lyndhurst. These sorts of stories inevitably begin with a mysterious moment, some great unexplained event. The scene is set, and the narrative begins apace. This story, however, breaks with tradition. It starts with an invitation to a party, a little light gossip, and the promise of new neighbors. Hardly the domain of the supernatural, but do not be put off. There shall be plenty of magic as our tale unfolds. You see, for the two heroines of said tale, the ordinary is extraordinary. In every way measured against humanity, these women are unusual to the extreme. They possess all the skills expected of women of birth, and are yet not women of birth in the traditional way. They are older, wiser, and stranger than their peers, yet possessed of abilities and persuasions to both delight and terrify. Yet, in the unlikely instance that someone should stumble into their garden, their appearance would not perhaps be enough to raise alarm. They sit together across a heavy iron table, positioned behind one of the largest mansions in Tarrytown, New York. Shade is provided by way of an enormous wisteria canopy. The two women sip tea out of delicate cups with an ivy and rose intertwined pattern, little rivulets of steam rising and eddying. One is tall and lean, her face unmarred by time, yet displaying a visible hunger in her lines. Perhaps it is her fiery eyes, an amber brown hue, or the shocking pale of her skin as it transitions to the full, inky curls about her brow. Either way, she is lovely by many measures, despite the pallor, and she dresses a la mode, down to the scalloping on her heels and the slant of her hat. These days she goes by the name Vivian Dulac. The other woman, Nerissa Melusine Valdemar, is shorter, rounder, with a plainer look to her features. Her eyes could be blue or gray or green, but never in a striking way. Her chin is a bit weak, her brows disrupted by a pair of spectacles. The hair atop her head might once have been arranged well, but now tumbles half-heartedly down one side. Her dress speaks to practicality, linned with mud about the hem, and something dark remains under her fingernails. There are enough clues within these descriptions to give a close observer pause. It is cold, yet the wisteria blooms. As long as the women talk, their tea does not grow cold. The woman with the tousled appearance wears no shoes, and now and again her grimy toes peek out from beneath the hem of her dress. The substance beneath each slivered moon of her fingernails is certainly blood. From the front, and indeed all other angles of the house, this little garden oasis is invisible, for the world around them is wreathed in winter snow and wind. Yet here, in their little enclave, no frost or flake dare invade. This private garden is for these two friends, and them alone. Their mundane tea time, though clearly accentuated by a most vexing magic, is possessed of a deep calm and comfort, the quiet of two women known long to one another. A third figure emerges from the house itself, a manservant of sorts. He is swarthy in appearance, dressed in the custom of a butler, with a long single braid down his neat beard. He is broad of shoulder and light of step, so light, in fact, that he does not appear to walk so much as he drifts. Yes, where his feet touch the ground is a rather curious blur, a smudge of topaz and light, where a pair of shoes ought to be. It is almost enough to be a distraction from the earrings he wears, thick and gold and marvelous, dangling almost to his shoulders. When the man, if he is so, approaches, giving a most regal bow, the pale woman stands. Barkan, she says, Nerissa and I were just discussing our new neighbors. Have they yet called? Barkan comes up from his bow and says, No, Lady Dulac. I've only now just received the post, and while the Villiers have sent a most impressive invitation, the rest is sadly bereft of communication from the Rockefellers. I told you they wouldn't call, Nerissa says, pushing up her spectacles with one hand and then peering down at her dirty foot as if to examine it. She frowns at what she sees and then straightens, taking in Barkan's figure. And you're not even trying to conceal yourself. It's shameful. Barkan raises a neat brow and presents the letters to Lady Dulac. He does not, as is his habit, entertain Nerissa's admonishment. He doesn't have to conceal when he's out here with us, Lady Dulac says sweetly, taking the proffered letters and rifling through them quickly. It's the least we can do considering his continued indenture against his will. You seem to have plenty of use for him, Nerissa says. That's only because I can't seem to break the bond. You know I find slavery abhorrent, replies Vivian, clicking her tongue. You promised me you'd find answers. Well, it isn't as if I don't have other work to do. Every time I bring it up, you seem to have another reason we should keep him around. It would be foolish to send him out to pasture while we figure all this out. I'm still here, Barkan says dryly. You're always here. That's the problem, Nerissa says, pushing away from the table. Her manner is like a farmhand getting up from milking the cows. I've got to visit the goats, she says to Lady Dulac. Viv, make sure you don't let warm holiday greetings get to your head. You promised one single party. That is all. Vivian stands across from Nerissa, clutching the invitations close to her chest. Other than a twitching finger, she is a figure of ice and snow. The intricate lace on her shoulders almost fades into her skin, looking more like fey tattoos than clothing. You're not allowed to tell me what to do, Vivian says. Nerissa laughs as she passes Barkan. Of course I'm allowed. You just don't ever listen. A faint flush of red creeps upon Vivian's cheeks. It does not make her look healthy. It makes her look monstrous, especially the way it accentuates her strange eyes. We agreed on 2 parties this year. That was last year. We've progressed firmly into 1911, Nerissa says, as she retreats up the steps to the long porch one of the servants is opening the way for her, or else just through the power of the enchanted door. You're getting forgetful in your old age, my dear. But I have 3 dresses already, Vivian whines. It's a piteous sound. 1 party. Choose well, Nerissa replies. She does not look back to see Vivian glaring at her, but knows full well the look. Before the tale goes much deeper, it is essential to understand a few important things about Vivian and Nerissa. As far as either of them knows, they are immortal. Nerissa is perhaps a century older than Vivian, but neither knows for sure. Those first dark decades of their lives are somewhat clouded with a mutual thirst for blood. It took a long time, many lifetimes in the most literal sense, to rectify that debt. It is far more difficult for Nerissa, who, unlike her friend Vivian, is far less human. But to say either of them is human is a stretch. Is a serpent any less a rock than a wolf? No, of course not. A human being may very well be defined by their extremely limited existences and their uncanny ability to tease out art and meaning in such a short pan. Neither Vivian nor Nerissa think much like human beings, though one might say that over the last years they've gone a bit human ish. Especially Vivian, who has always been drawn to people and their lives and rules. It gives her the illusion of warmth in her state of permafrost, as Nerissa is fond of calling it. Vivian is not the only one of her kind, but one of a dying race. Many have heard of the Fae or the Fates, and she is certainly related to both of them. Most properly, she is a night sylph. In her youth, she was known for wooing young men and then driving them mad once they discovered she was not, in fact, human. This is very traumatic for men, especially those in the age of chivalry, for whom powerful women were ever a source of terror. It is in her nature to fall in love, however, and while she has learned some ways to curb her most deadly tendencies, it is not unheard of her to fall off the wagon now and again. Nerissa, meanwhile, is more reptile than human being. However, she is able to change her appearance to suit any will. Most of the time, she looks as she does now, a barefooted and rather untidy woman of middling age who would be more at home in a library than a vast manse like the current residence, which Vivian calls the Joyous Guard. Nerissa finds the name ridiculous, as most of Vivian's human obsessions. She has yet to get over the fact that she could not woo Launcelot from Guinevere, and has named the manse in his honor. The place is actually called Knoll, properly, or else Lyndhurst, and it is a fine enough name. In specific terms, Nerissa is a Lamia. Unlike Vivian, she is the last of her kind. This is owed to the fact that most were killed during the previous century, often mistaken for vampires during the last purge. It was due to Vivian's social connections and Nerissa's own reformed behavior, no longer subsisting on human blood and instead turning to her flock of goats, that she was glossed over. Lamias are far more trusting of mankind, or at least they were before the purge, so they came to a most gruesome end. Now that the world has turned another century past, and the Americas established beyond a backwater trading post, Vivian and Nerissa, after long centuries in England, Russia, China, and Japan, came at last to New York City itself. Finding the rush of such a place a bit too much to handle and their fortune better suited elsewhere, they relocated upstate to a town on the Hudson called Tarrytown, on the suggestion of a friend, one Anna Gould, who happened to be enduring a most horrendous divorce. Rather than stay in her family's abode, she hired her friend Vivian to keep after the place herself. Miss Gould could doubtfully knew the true nature of Miss Dulac and Miss Valdemar, but as so many before her, she found Vivian near impossible to argue with. And given the option to live in a Gothic manse, Vivian spared no effort. Much of Nerissa's work, however, is tied up in the business of maintaining such a property, though it will never be hers entirely. A strange side effect of her kind is the incapability of ever owning land or property. Vivian is all dreams and delights, while Nerissa is habitually left with the dregs. It has been Vivian's idea to build the Painted Garden, as she calls it, a kind of mirror to the Fae realm in between the walls of Lyndhurst itself, a memory of the lives they once lived, giving up their native world for this. Both have ever been creatures of both worlds, but the Fae realm is far behind in times of fashion and sadly lacking in blood nourishment. As Nerissa walks along the corridors of the ridiculously long mansion, it is honestly one of the most befuddling and insulting recreations of the Gothic she has ever seen. She thinks about the goats and about her distaste for the genie Vivian has masquerading as a manservant. It is a touch too precious, she thinks, and invariably a giveaway. He does not like doing what he is told, and often lets things slip under the guise. It's happened before, their discovery, and it's never ended well. The agreement is to stay on at Lyndhurst for at least 5 years, and while only one has passed, it has felt like an eternity. The socialites of Tarrytown and its surrounding cozy towns are nothing if they aren't insistent on parties and soirees and galas and events, all of which disgust Nerissa. Human food makes Nerissa downright ill, especially fruit. To her, they always smell half rotted. Why anyone would want to stuff slimy seed pods down their gullet is beyond her. But Vivian absolutely adores human food. It doesn't even make a difference whether or not she eats it, as her energy is simply gained from being around people, a kind of latent vampirism that doesn't little harm in small doses but can be deadly in large. Nerissa has no such luck. She knows she's cranky because she hasn't had much in the way of food, but in this forsaken place, it takes so long to make the trip from the garden to the pasture. The groundskeepers know to leave Nerissa alone to the goats, and she picks times when she knows they won't be around. The younger one, Jim, has been looking at her a little oddly, but most of the servants simply discuss her as being the eccentric sister, when it's plain to see for anyone with a pair of eyes that the two mistresses of the house are not related. Still, Nerissa feels her worry lessen slightly as she approaches the flock. She consented to a pair of boots on her way out, but as soon as she nears the paddock, she shirks them off and climbs the gate and sits among the goats for a bit as they paw around her. Despite her frequent feedings, they are not afraid of her. She doesn't kill them after all, and based on skills learned while in Africa, she knows how to bleed them with minimal pain and maximum harvesting. She only feeds off the females, of course. The rams are too aggressive and kept in another pasture, their blood muddied and unsavory to her palate. Today is Millie's turn to give the gift of nourishment to Nerissa. The ewe is 2 years old by now, Nerissa reckons, and full of vigor. She does taste best. Taking Millie by the bell, she walks her to the little stable where she goes about her, quote, scientific work, as she has told the staff. She's given explicit instructions to be left alone, despite their curious glances. After the first few months, however, and tasting the first slaughter, they did not ask further questions. A fortunate side effect of Nerissa's feeding is surprisingly tender and less gamey meat. While no self-respecting elite would deign to eat such subpar meat, the servants at Lyndhurst have absolutely no qualms regarding its swift consumption. To feed, however, Nerissa cannot continue the facade of her human form. Practicing magic while absorbing life is almost impossible. One cannot both sneeze and drink at the same time, after all. The goats see her change, but it doesn't appear to unnerve them. Most of them have moved on now that they understand Millie is to be selected. One might say, in their primitive capabilities, they have rallied around the Lamia as followers of some ancient goat deity. But a few remain behind, nibbling weeds at the edge of the shed and peering toward her every now and again. She disrobes and prepares to change, still petting Millie and preparing her. Were a human being to see Nerissa change, as very few have, they would not remain so composed as Millie and her sisters. Her skin shifts in 1,000 little undulations, myriad little plates rising in patterned scales about her face and down her arms. Where there were 2 arms and 2 legs, a most common arrangement for Homo sapiens, there are now 4 arms, each with black claws upon fingers, and a long tail more akin to a dragon or large lizard than a snake. There are some smaller appendages that sprout from the sides under the dress she wears that might prove helpful for some basic locomotion, but judging from the sheer musculature, they are likely unnecessary. Her face and hair shift as well, her eyes going black, not just the color of her eyes, but the sclera as well, and widen to the size of a horse's. Nerissa's hair loses its soft, loose quality, and each individual strand becomes thicker like limp algae. She's not ugly by Lamia standards, to say the least. Should any number see her, they would compliment the blood red of her teeth and the glistening mucus on her lips and ears and nose. These are desired characteristics, and it is rumored in their heyday many went to great lengths to appear such a way, supporting a small cosmetics industry in ancient Greece. But to Nerissa, who has known so few of her own kind, she sees her own hands, all 4 of them, and shudders. The talons, the scales, these are elements of her body she has grown ashamed of over the centuries. Humankind fears these things, those of cold blood, those of rough skin. Though she can shift into any shape imaginable and has lived the life of men and women a dozen times over, she must always be this way to feed. She must always face her true self in all its sticky, inhuman glory. The talons are, at least, ideal for extraction. There is that one vein common in many domesticated creatures. The Maasai use an arrow. Nerissa uses her talon to puncture the vein and drain the blood. By the time this happens, Millie is in a daze. Nerissa suspects it is her eyes. In the dark, her own are similar to the goats, curiously shaped hourglasses just faintly darker than the black around them. Perhaps goats see it too. When at last Nerissa emerges from the shed, having made sure that Millie is sufficiently recovered, she is back to the guise she wears most days. This is as human as she gets. She chooses the details of eccentricity, not because she must, but because it helps her get into character. It also means she's forgiven for avoiding some of the trappings of her sex shoes, extensive petticoats, that sort of thing, and can be excused when she lapses. Now that she's sated, however, she realizes how awful she's been to Vivian. This is what happens when she waits too long to feed. Ideally, she would feed every day, but now she stretches out her feedings to thrice weekly, making sure to feed strategically. When she was younger and far more active, the food was a necessity, but this soft life of dinner parties and gardening does not quite require such gluttony. Yet it has ever been getting more difficult to maintain this abbreviated eating schedule. Goats are not as nutritious as humans, even with the special diet she's developed for them, and she must rotate through the herd to get ample feeding. In the back of her mind, she begins to worry that she may need to consider a new kind of beast. Goats are easy, but she doubts something larger like a cow would be so manageable. Going through two goats at a sitting would be difficult, but so would changing the arrangement with Lyndhurst. Nerissa is so engrossed in her thoughts that she does not notice the shadowy figure emerge from the side of the shed. The figure is slight, cloaked, and swift moving. When Nerissa turns slightly to check on Millie one last time, the figure is gone, and while she senses an odd shift in the air, she thinks little of it and instead simply keeps on her way toward the main house to apologize to Vivian. Chapter 2: A Winter's Ball. Vivian spends most of the next week planning for the ball at the Villiers mansion. While they are not her favorite family of note, they do have one of the larger properties and are known to invite a mix of foreign dignitaries, artists, and occasionally a more bohemian sort to their parties. George Villiers, the patriarch of the family, was something of a world traveler in his time and generally accepted to be a gregarious and generous man with a penchant for making friends in and out of society with his charm. This extends, of course, to those of the gentler sex, for whom he is also generally accepted to have appetite. His wife, Lady Edna Montague Villiers, is that pale, fragile kind of woman so often found in such circles, too concerned about her own diminishing health, much of which can never be corroborated by doctors, but always by palmists and soothsayers, none of whom are authentic, to see what's going on right beneath her roof. To Vivian, such concepts as fidelity feel very old fashioned. Having lived through a number of court situations in her time and outlived every last one of her mortal lovers, or killed them, same difference, she finds the simultaneous shock and awe of matters between the sheets to be tiresome. No, what truly excites Vivian Dulac about parties is the clothing. Since the first moment she set her eyes upon a human being, she knew in an instant that clothing, that fashion, connected her to them in a way it did none of her sisters. They are mostly happy to frolic in their natural forms, to weave weeds of water and air, flower and frond. And in a rather basic, primitive way, she supposes that as alluring. Sylphs have a reputation for treating nudity as a kind of art. Aside from their paleness, they do look very human indeed, yet suffer none of the unfortunate side effects of aging. So, ever curving breasts and unmarred skin make for a good show. But Vivian adores materials, patterns, the play of light on thread. She is quite good at her own handiwork, but has to play down her talents lest she attract too much attention. Her formula for success is simple. Find a willing accomplice, typically a relatively little known designer from Paris or the closest city, and strike a deal with them. She provides a healthy stipend and extensive notes, drawings, and schematics for each and every dress. All credit is relinquished, of course, and once they learn from her craft and approach, they are free to use it elsewhere. That said, the week before the ball is a dizzying maelstrom of samples, measurements, and fittings. She is even allowed to dress Nerissa to her extreme distaste because they agree to show a unified front. They can't endure the gossip of a grand gown and a horrible one together. It would raise too many questions. Living in secret has its own great challenges, but Vivian has discovered over the many years of her existence among humans that character covers up many ills. While she has not lived in this part of the world for quite some time, she knows this kind of people well enough, especially those from the city. And the Villiers party will be filled with the elite, and by extension, the most fashionable in the entire hemisphere. She simply cannot miss such an opportunity. "Are you certain about this?" asks Mr. Pender, the clothier most recently employed by Vivian Dulac. He is a short, thin man with an even thinner mustache. He favors stripes and shiny buttons, and he generally doesn't argue with her. But Vivian already knows this is the point which he's going to struggle. The colors are unusual, lavender and white and black fur, but that he does not question. The accessories are unusual, raw mother of pearl in natural shapes instead of square facets, and Mr. Pender accepts these with a smile. It is simply the length, or lack thereof, that makes Mr. Pender aback. "Trust me," Vivian says, smoothing her hand across the top layer of her dress, a slightly darker shade of purple than the sheath below. In a year or two, it will be all the rage. But do you not think it's slightly inappropriate? He asks with some difficulty. And then he adds, You don't think you'll be cold? Vivian, of course, remembers her earlier days, and particularly her wooing of many a night and her favorite outfits comprised simply of strategically placed orchids. She smiles anyway, patting Mr. Pender on the shoulder. You forget the black and white fur capelet. It will keep me more than warm. But the dress, your ankles. My ankles will be fine, sir. You needn't worry. Or are you so concerned for your reputation that you would give up the sum I've set aside for you? Vivian doesn't need to look at him. She feels his energy, feels his sensations and heat like moving webs all about them. It's an ancient dance, and many men have tried and failed to take the lead. She will not kill Mr. Pender, not yet anyway, but she is strong enough still and wise enough now that she is able to twist his thoughts just so. He won't love her. She never could tolerate that sort of thing. But he will trust her, and that's halfway there. Mr. Pender looks to make an argument, but then all the fight goes out of him and he says no more. The rest of the planning goes without incident, and Mr. Pender is even amenable enough to finish the work on Nerissa's dress, which is nowhere near as beautiful, but just as short. When they finally arrive at the Drummings, the Villiers mansion, known locally as the Rookery for the ever present ravens atop its spires, or droppings due to the unfortunate side effect of the avian guests, the drive leading up to the front entrance is a mangle of broughams and carriages and frustrated valets. For the average party grower, the weather is a horror. Wind and drizzle have made the affair both soggy and frigid, casting uncomely splashes of red and snot across many a fair face in attendance, man and woman alike. To think of all that work dashed because of a cruel twist of climate. Nerissa and Vivian never have to worry about such inconveniences. For Nerissa's part, she can look however she wants so long as she does not reveal her true face. For Vivian, she is always flawless. Her skin does not age nor needs embellishment. Her dark hair and glassy eyes could not have been better shaped had they been carved in marble. Oh, look, it's Lady Olivier, Vivian says, peering out the window with a crooked smile. She's fallen into a puddle, and she's beating her footman about the head with her purse. And by the sound of it, she snatched the entirety of the family's jewels in it. The poor man. The way she giggles, however, reveals her true feelings on the matter. Nerissa fiddles with the sleeve of her dress. The whole contraption is ungodly uncomfortable. How is it that Vivian manages to find one horrid dress after another with levels of such mind-bogglingly engineering for the sole purpose of tormenting her? Nerissa knows well enough that maintaining human form, any form, is difficult as it is. One's original form does not simply vanish into the ether. It must be cleverly hidden and maintained over a long period of time. She still has extra arms and a long serpentine tail. It is only through skill and concentration that she keeps them concealed. Sometimes I think you want me to lose my glamour, Nerissa says, pulling Vivian away from the window. And don't gawk. You'll draw attention. Of course I will. It's the whole idea, Vivian says, stifling a giggle. When they finally reach the entrance, it's quite clear that the poor Villiers have done a very poor job at planning for the weather. There are not enough servants to manage the thick coats. The marble steps are slick, and while some of the effort has been made to throw salt, it is still perilously slippery. Neither Vivian nor Nerissa have any trouble navigating, of course, but they make a show of looking as if they are in need of help to avoid raising any eyebrows. They have both learned to do this instinctively, a kind of chameleon act around humans. Nerissa prepares herself as they present their cards to the footman. Even in the chaos, it is time for the ball to begin. In fact, well past time. The smell of rich food reaches Nerissa just as their names are called, and she takes a few deep breaths, hoping that she can keep her wits together in the presence of so many frenzied human beings. She is rarely tempted these days to drink of them, but when they get excited and angry, she finds her tastes return in flashes. Vivian has no such difficulty, nor such concern. The center of this space is her very element. Angry or happy or afraid, it matters little to her. Just being among the crush of the crowd infuses her with a glow she is otherwise lacking. Her stony features brighten, her hair shines brighter. She is prepared to make her entrance. The anticipation is almost overwhelming for her, as the heavy doors open, so thickly laden with holly, ivy, and juniper that for a moment it is as if she is walking into a hidden forest. Her heart races, her pulse beats inhumanly fast. The feeling is not nervousness. Her body is not built in a way to experience such human emotions. But it is the thrill of the hunt, the promise of satiety, that so pushes her forward. It is her favorite moment when all eyes turn to her, when she, above all others, is held up as the ideal, a point of jealousy, a point of adulation, like a goddess of old. Except something happens, something wrong. When her name is called, it is called wrong, Lady Vivian Dulac. And then in the din, everyone is looking through her because they call another name louder, and everyone has hushed. They are not paying attention to her. Miss Christabel Crane, comes a booming voice. It seems that someone has found a megaphone. Vivian is unceremoniously ushered away, Nerissa separated from her before she can object, but just long enough that she can glimpse the face and form of her foil. A small girl, barely into womanhood, but graced with every measure of loveliness treasured in this time. Long, pale curls piled upon her head, with precise twists and turns, looking both refined and just tousled enough. Her face is sweet and her lips fresh, but the dress is truly the point of attention. Vivian knows with but the merest of glances that it is from the hand of a familiar rival, Jeanne Paquin. Ah, still, the dress! It did not rely on any kind of trick or gimmick, for the dress, while not cut in any unusual way, looked as if it had been painted with albino peacocks. A living painting. The material shimmers through each and every feather, and as she walks past Vivian, it seems that the birds move their heads ever so slightly. And still, there is more. The dress is merely half of the trouble. On young Christabel's arm is none other than Vivian's old paramour, Worth Goodwin, the son of the questing beast herself, may she rest in peace. Perfect, brilliant Worth Goodwin, tall and clever, bright as a summer sun, both the opposite and complement to Vivian, and her greatest folly. She stands confused, thinking him dead for a very long while now. The last time Nerissa saw Worth Goodwin, it was 1850. He was to go off on an adventure to locate one of the exigents they were ever fighting, a kind of fey creature gone mad with evil and vice. Different from aberrants who were dangerous but less conscious, a minotaur to a bison, respectively. But that last time, over long cigarettes at the William Blake in London, it was as if they had not all shared a house together for 100 years, nor had they worked together to track down ancient artifacts with the power to destroy Britain and indeed most of the continent as well. Nerissa and Worth were a good team, a marvelous team, until Vivian fell in love with him, until the two of them began feeding off each other's powers and hating each other. It wasn't a good situation for either of them. Worth needed to be wanted, to be hunted, and Vivian needed to hunt. Both creatures woven of supernatural threads and should have been kept apart. Nerissa was worried they would destroy one another, and with a world in such short supply of beings as wondrous as they, she didn't exactly destroy their relationship, but she nudged it enthusiastically in the direction of utter annihilation. Enthusiastically. She conspired with Worth to get him out of the country and assume his demise. It was easier that way for Vivian, who would continue to follow him if she knew the truth. Lying to the sylph was surprisingly easy to do once Nerissa got the hang of it. Besides, jealousy over their relationship was making her scales go flaky. Now, seeing the look on Vivian's face, however, Nerissa realizes that all her work was in vain. Vivian would always love Worth. The idea that she could have prevented such a thing seemed utter folly now. How could she have ever thought she had the power to prevent him from coming back? She thought they had an arrangement. But no. Oop, sorry, lost my page. Uh, but no. Nerissa calms herself down. She can feel her skin going scaly and loses her sense of her disguise would help absolutely no one. The panic subsides. Worth Goodwin is with another woman. And by the way, she is casting loving glances up at him. He is no simple escort. Does the young girl have any idea how old he is? Likely not. Human is perhaps his most favored form, but a glissant, he can be any animal he wants. Nerissa is generally limited to the humanesque, though once she managed a satyr, it is as uncomfortable as one might imagine. Now, Vivian, yes, she is not happy. She is frozen. Nerissa must rein in her glee, must compose herself, because while it is terrible to see Worth Goodwin, it is not terrible to see him with another woman. It is, in fact, delightful. Unless it inspires Vivian to go into a blood-soaked frenzy, But it has been at least 100 years since she's done that. So, Vivian, Nerissa whispers, taking her friend by the arm. She is frigid to the touch, all the warmth and vitality of the event draining from her upon seeing Worth. Let us go see what sort of canapes they have over there. I am told their vol au are amazing. I want to go home, Vivian says, and begins to sink back toward the front door. She does not look at Nerissa. She does not seem capable of getting her eyes away from Worth. He's just a silly creature, Nerissa says, hesitant to use the word man, since it is far from an accurate description. They are close enough that such words would not get caught by those around them. Let him to his whatever it is he's working on. But I thought he was dead in Brazil, Vivian says dreamily. Nerissa winces, as that is more or less what she told Vivian, and more or less a fabrication. Their sundering was a long time ago, and the details a bit fuzzy, and Nerissa may have expanded on some of the details a little beyond the realm of the factual. The truth is, she knew Worth was miserable, but she was tired of hunting aberrants. So she stole Vivian's ledger, a remarkable book containing the details of the work of Valdemar and Goodwin, meticulously illustrated and annotated, and sent it off with Worth in exchange for his freedom. He did go to Brazil, at least briefly. I thought the same thing, died hunting orchids, and Nerissa says hurriedly, "Oh, look, it's Mrs. Boddinger." Nerissa tries, but she really has no capacity or desire to know the names of the elite of Tarrytown and New York City proper. They are but spirits on a similar course, but brief interruptions. Rockefeller, Nerissa hisses, and at last this gets Vivian's attention, and the attention of most of the people around them. The impropriety is at least enough to cause Vivian to turn on her friend, grab her by the arm, and escort her away from Christabel Crane, whomever she may be, and toward the canapes. Once, Worth. Once upon a time, Worth. Once upon a time, Worth and Vivian together, entwined, strangers to the world, supernatural beings of curious, heavenly form. They were happy and furious and constantly rutting, to say nothing of all the arguing, though that was part of the passion too. But Vivian doesn't remember the last part in that moment. When she beholds Worth Goodwin for the first time in nearly a century, her thoughts aren't of the fights, the trysts, the jealousy, the lies. They are, instead, full to bursting with reminiscences of certain smells, olfactory being one of her strongest suits and most connected to her memories, redolent of coupling and frolicking and general mischief making. Worth always brought out the devious side of her, and she in him. The sense of elation lasts for just a short jolt of time. As mentioned before, Vivian is not human. She does not experience emotion or indeed time in the same way as a human. Her emotions are layers, and often she gets tied up in one or another. It is difficult for her to feel her way through the layers once she has ventured down into them. And once she understands that Worth Goodwin is not simply attending to Christabel Crane, whoever she may be, she descends quickly into cold madness. Jealousy is a guaranteed venture into the deepest chill of her soul. This is the state Nerissa calls permafrost, and it is a helpful state for Vivian, at least from a purely defensive standpoint. She becomes nigh impervious to the slings and arrows of the world about her. Her body temperature drops, her movements slow. She is no less lovely, but much more deadly. Those human-ish components of her body diminish significantly, and her ability to make calculations where human life is concerned goes along with them, which rarely ends well for anyone, let alone Vivian herself. Which is why Nerissa is essential to her overall reformation. The good years have been consistent with her around. The Lamia is even less humanish than Vivian, and yet she has a great deal more intuition about her. Perhaps Vivian wonders in one of her own deep down layers, it's because she doesn't feed off people in the same way. She doesn't know them immediately, feel them about her like a pressing wave. She has to reach out to read the signals. Vivian, listen to me, please, Nerissa is saying at her. Vivian discovers she is now sitting upon a gaudy settee in a rather dark room. There is a window open somewhere, and she can hear the rain pattering on the roof. It smells of stale old people and musty clothing, and she'd rather not be in such a place. But it is the sort of location Nerissa always seeks out, the dark and the dank. I listen to you far too much if you ask me, Vivian replies, batting at her friend. You told me he was dead. Nerissa takes a deep breath and backs away, her scales shimmering for a moment before they're hidden beneath layers of her glamour again. Vivian thinks it's a shame, though she's never mentioned it, because she's quite lovely when she's in her natural form. But that would be unwelcome. Nerissa has told her time and again over the many long years of their friendship that her natural state is abhorrent, and telling her otherwise would just be confusing. Most likely dead, she says in reply to Vivian. I loved him. You were bad for each other. But so delicious, Vivian sighs. He didn't even look at me. I don't know what to say to him. Well, you best consider. You almost caused a scene, you know. Mrs. Yarborough nearly passed out when she touched you. You could have taken down half the party with your antics. Antics, laughs Vivian, the bitter edge to her voice like a cold knife. You can't honestly tell me that that's it. You've been in a state for an hour, Nerissa says. An hour. After all this work for this ridiculous party, you freeze up and I have to half drag you up the stairs. I am in disarray, but I have composed myself, Vivian replies, brushing her hair with her fingers, preparing to re-enter the fray. She must steel herself. If Worth sees her in such a weak state, he will assume her frail and pining. And while that might be true in the realest sense, when it comes to him, it cannot be. She must be better. Because I took care of things. Why? Nerissa pauses a second, giving Vivian the look of disappointment before saying, because that's what I always do. Oh, come now. You act as if these things happen all the time. You know very well that I've been on very good behavior since Worth. Yes, that's what frightens me. It looks like he's got his hands full as it is, and Vivian feels him before she sees him. She always does. The huntress knows her prey, even when she's been wronged. She smells him, tastes the words on his tongue before he utters them in the doorway. She's only surprised she didn't sense him earlier. He enters the room, and with him comes the smell of the deep forest, of home, copper and dirt and growing things, wet fur and 1,000 memories at once. He is so handsome, down to his very essence, and Vivian wants nothing more than to surround herself in him once again. But his look is cold, focusing more on the lamia than herself. How can one cause physical pain with a glance? It is most unfair. Regardless of what it may look like, I am here to see you, says Worth. Both of you. It's been a long while. Worth is limned in dull light from behind, his dark brown hair cast slightly auburn. It is a familiar face he's wearing now, much like the one Vivian met when they were first introduced. The one he wore when he and Nerissa were in business together, if it can be called such a thing. Valdemar and Goodwin, monster hunters. For a while, it was an interesting collaboration, and she did enjoy working on the ledger of their adventures and finding an outlet for her alchemical hobbies, but Nerissa hisses, the sound echoing off the walls of the small room, breaking her thoughts. What would one call this place? A foyer? A closet? Some anteroom to the balcony, perhaps? Whatever container she's been put in, Vivian is momentarily taken aback by the sound her friend makes. It's a sound she's not heard in a very long time, and it reminds her of tastier meals than the canapes at tonight's festivities. Vivian does not have time to process her surroundings further, nor does she concern herself with memories of bygone days, because seeing Worth this close throws her down on more layers of motion, not yet to the permafrost, but to a crackling tundra just above it. That's hard to believe, says Nerissa. You look like you've had your hands quite full. I assure you my intent is pure, Worth says, looking genuinely hurt. Pitiful creature, but too damned handsome for his own good. But where are my manners? It's been quite some time since we've seen one another, and I was under the impression that you two were off to take significantly less visible existence. Who had ever told you that? Says Vivian, finding her voice, though it's little meeker than she'd like. Circumspection and gossip. You know I never like being out of the limelight. Except when you're wanted for murder, Worth points out. That was a long time ago, and not the entire story, Vivian interrupts. And for the most part, you are right. We have been keeping a low profile, inasmuch as we have not been working the same capacity as we did once, when you were part of my business. Your business, asks Vivian. That is a strange way of saying things, but she senses that yet again Nerissa is playing at some invisible territory game with Worth. They were ever at each other's throats before, but to say that the business was Nerissa's alone is quite a blow to both of them. Vivian was essential to keeping them funded, to helping to access the strange and arcane. She might not have accompanied them on every mission, but that's precisely why I came here. Well, one of the heard rumors, well, I heard rumors of a pair of women that met your descriptions taking up residence at Lyndhurst. I haven't been to New York long, you see, but my friend, Miss Crane, has a request to make of you, and I promised to make introductions, Worth said, taking a tentative step forward. Miss Crane can ask us herself, Nerissa says. Oh, yes, she will, says Worth. But I first wanted to prepare you, of course, for the matter at hand. There is a detail of rather immense importance. Where have you been? Asks Vivian, the words coming out of her mouth before she can stop them. She is bobbing between the permafrost and the frozen tundra, then down to the fire at her core. He isn't even looking at her. He's addressing Nerissa. He's half ignoring her. What madness is this? Who is this Miss Crane? Asks the Lamia. Your new paramour. She is no lemon, says Worth. That's what I needed to explain. I have to tell you how I got here, how I found you, and but why did you leave? Vivian asks, her voice high and pining. Why did you leave in the first place? Did I make you so miserable? There would be time to answer this question, Vivian knows, if the world were a fair place. But she is a supernatural being, one whom even the earth does not seem to understand. From below them in the main hall, there is a sound like gunfire, but lower. It reverberates, causes Vivian ears to ache. It reminds her of their bygone days when Worth and Nerissa would sometimes take their work home, or else they traveled pathways between the Fae and the Grey, what they called the world of the mortals. Worth curses lowly. Prepare yourself, he says. They may have deep pockets, but their wits are shallow. He takes Vivian's arm, his hand warm through his gloves, the energy of him flowing freely into her so perfectly and completely she almost cries out. I'm perfectly capable of defending myself, Vivian says, making no attempt to free herself of his touch. Please, what is happening? Something bad, is all the Gladysant offers. Please, you must focus. You must not kill them. He looks pointedly at Nerissa. No promises, Lamia replies smoothly. Nerissa, please, Vivian says curtly. Except she knows Nerissa cannot focus well in a frenzy. Too much blood, and there would be no controlling her, no matter how reformed. Worth grits his teeth and gazes at Vivian, deep circles like bruises under his eyes. The look in his eyes is sharp, concerned. People downstairs are panicking. The walls of the rookery shudder again. But then there is something darker, something else. Vivian senses it has been here the whole time, but with the shock of what happened in the room, it has slipped away. Something shifts, slides away into the night, a dark creature moving below with speed and power. Vivian feels its negative presence, sucking in the energy she's claimed as her own. What is that? She muses half to herself. You felt it, Worth asks, blanching. It's leaving. It's gone, Vivian breathes, shaking her head to dispel it like a bad dream. I didn't realize the danger we were in until it had left. Worth looks visibly relieved, but then he winces. They're coming. Brace yourselves. They may not know how to behave. Do you remember how to fight? Nerissa asks Worth from across the room. Clearly she's come prepared because she's carrying that silly silver knife she always manages to sneak on her person, as if she needs a weapon. She's a living tool of destruction. And lies, it appears, considering her present company. Lies and knives are nearly the same thing. Worth nods, but Vivian senses he's nervous. But that could be the echoes from below. Servants are running every which way, platters falling to the ground. The walls shake again, sending plaster and dust into her hair and across the shoulders of her gown. This is enough to send her into action, and, with Nerissa in the lead, she follows along into the breach. Chapter 3. Ouroboros. When the world was younger, and people were more accepting of strange beings, Nerissa was often told that she was an exception of her kind. Many Lamias were known, she had heard, for being blinded by love and wanting that they were easily caught with a bit of fresh blood for the promise of a warm body. While there were certainly times in her life where such a temptation might have garnered her attention, she, nonetheless, prided herself on rising above the stereotype. As a feared creature, she knew that humankind often portrayed her sort in bold strokes so as not to be faced with the truth, that they are inferior in nearly every manner known. From their incessant need to breed and excrete, to their ever-changing rituals and religions and rules, human beings are short-lived and even shorter-minded. Perhaps that's why they taste so good. Less time to get gamey. That thinking, however, would get Nerissa killed. She had spent years training that part of her brain to resist the call of human blood, and until she sees the scene in the Villiers ballroom, she is confident in her practice. The source of the noise is an explosive of some sort, designed to propel glass shards in every direction. And as a result, human blood is everywhere. Women are dripping in it, their arms and shoulders streaming the stuff. Men are wiping it from their foreheads. No one appears mortally wounded, but the shrapnel has shredded quite a few guests to the point where they look strewn in red ribbons. And it smells so delicious, Nerissa can hardly stand it, even though she's aware that this is likely a trap. She feels Vivian behind her, hears someone cry out. She knows she's slipping, can't hold, will eat, finally, what is not goat blood, and another explosion, someone cries just before it happens. It's a perfect diversion, and Worth pulls her so violently around her waist that she flies back with him, bursting back through a pair of doors. She fights with him because she hates him and knows she can't win because he's the Gladysant, and he will never let him have Vivian because he doesn't deserve her and Nerissa does. Come now, Nerissa, we must behave, admonishes the Gladysant. She wants to rip out his eyes. It would be most satisfying. Eyes are her favorite part. They struggle through a dark hallway, blessedly free of people, save for a few servants who pretend to look the other way. They have been well trained. Vivian is reigning in her power, but Nerissa can feel it building. Yes, yes, this is what she was hoping for. Perhaps if Vivian lets go, they will be able to leave this dreadful place and start again somewhere else, somewhere warm, without corsets. They twist and turn into a storeroom and begin to fight in earnest, Nerissa fighting back both Worth and the mounting fury inside her. So much human blood. She wants to get through him to get a taste, and in that moment will do anything to attain her meal. It isn't the first time she's fought with Worth, but he's holding back. Neither of them are letting go entirely. He doesn't feed on people. His power is a strange, intangible thing. He does not need to live off human beings in such a way, and as such, has always kept far from the Fae. But Nerissa senses that he's expecting this somehow. He'd been trying to warn them. It's hard to remember when all she can think of is draining people of their lifeblood. In her moment of weakness, Worth clobbers her across the shoulders well and good, and Nerissa tumbles forward into a high cabinet stocked with glasses and platters. They rain around them, clattering off her body as ineffectual as rain. Though she does not yet appear a monster, her scales are tougher than iron and still exist beneath her glamour. Nerissa sees an opening and goes for Worth's side, hoping to sink her claws into his skin, but coming up empty as he writhes away. He's deadly fast and dances away as if her steps are choreographed. But the angrier she gets, the clearer she understands Worth's weaknesses. It's his disguise that's his weakest. It stems from a thumb-sized organ in his chest, and it works to refract and bend light and sensation. His human form is real and functioning, but only so long as the pressure point isn't harmed. A good thwack around the center, and he's bound to go down. She rises up on her back tails, wonderfully strong, and roots herself to the ground, preparing to deliver the blow just when he's least expecting. Nerissa is about to get the rise on him when Vivian stops everything. It's a talent she has. Her permafrost is usually contained, but she can express it with surprising alacrity given the right circumstances. While fisticuffs don't become her, and she's reticent to fight considering the risk it runs to anything with a pulse, she is strikingly good at them. Then the world stops abruptly at icy command, and Nerissa and Worth are frozen together in a hideous pastiche. He, part jaguar, gazelle, and bison, and she ripped entirely through her dress and protruding her tails halfway down the hallway. Vivian will be most furious that she burst out of her vestments. Vivian, for her part, rises in a frosty column, ice in her wake like the delicate veil on a bride of death. Nerissa is ready for the inevitable tide of stinging icicles. This is not the first time Vivian has had to separate the two, but her power stops, a wave of warmth blasting into the room, enough that Vivian falls to her feet, but not enough to thaw the Gladysant and Lamia. Then lights kindle, doors slam. Nerissa can feel a dozen presences or so cluster around them. Vivian groans something incomprehensible in Fey. You see, I told you they were the real thing, says a voice cracked with age. They are hushed words of praise and amazement, laughing too. Well, it is as we thought. Welcome, friends, to the Circle of Iapetus. We welcome you into our mysteries and employ your help. A second speaker. The voice comes from a tall man, stern of face, but not quite aged into palsy. This is not, Nerissa thinks, Mr. Villiers, who, as she recalls, is merely a winter or two away from death, what can only be described as frustrating irregularity. Sometimes she's able to ascertain the future of various mortals, and for some reason Mr. Villiers is on her list. Neither Worth nor Nerissa can speak, but that's due to Vivian's spell, though it's lessening. Nerissa begins to calm herself, to steady her hearts and slow her blood. Outright attacking Worth might not have been the best course of action, but she did enjoy it. Please, Miss Dulac, says a young woman, coming from behind the first speaker. It's Christabel Crane. I implore you to release your friends and let us parley with you. I promise we mean no harm. I hoped Mr. Goodwin had a chance to discuss the matter with you. Vivian, Nerissa knows, is currently living her nightmare in the bold contrast of a Caravaggio painting. Not only is she revealed to this ragtag group of mortals as a wretched witch, her hair while strewn about her head, her nails long like icicles, her breasts bared for all to see, but she has also torn her dress. It's about time, Nerissa supposes, that someone has figured them out. She's both relieved and annoyed, but then she hasn't been trying that hard. Barefooted women gallivanting around cavorting with goats are bound to attract attention at some point or another, after all. No matter how precious Vivian is about such things, Nerissa is always the weaker in terms of presentation. A snake is a snake, after all. With a deep breath, Vivian drops her pale arms, and when she does so, both Worth and Nerissa fall to the ground. Worth uses the opportunity to shift back into his human form, though he is regrettably lacking clothing. Nerissa, however, decides to abstain from any glamour at the moment in a kind of silent protest. Though she is the most talented of the group, she is glad to save her energy. That, and now free of her corset, she is hesitant to even whip up a semblance of the confounded contraption. She casts the remnant of her split garment to the side and hisses. Nerissa isn't yet convinced that biting off a few heads won't be in the cards this evening, and it's been so long since she's had a good draft with the carotid. I made the attempt to speak to them in a civil manner, says Worth, breathless, but we were interrupted before I had the chance. You took too long, says an old woman with the air of a vulture. Vivian would know the name, but Nerissa can't be bothered with such details. The crone would be sour to eat, judging by the yellow stains on her fingers and around her mouth. Not to say that the elderly are genuinely less tasty, quite the opposite. She's always enjoyed a little mellow to her marrow. I took too long, madame, asks Worth, looking quite offended, his body flushing red in response. I'll have you know that I took half the allotted time. They hadn't even brought out the canapes yet, Vivian says dreamily. She seems a bit dazed, and that does not sit well with a Lamia. That was a dangerous prank, Nerissa says, and her voice is rough in her throat. She sounds practically feral, and she'd forgotten how good it is to use her regular voice. People could have died. Should have died. They didn't, the first man says. Most of the blood was already in the device before it went off. We were very careful. And your plan was to what? Unveil us to the whole of the New York elite? Nerissa asks. Christabel looks mortified at the behavior of her fellow mortals, and she presses in front of the talkative man, saying, Mr. Rockefeller, are you telling me you detonated a blood bomb? I was doubtful, he says, looking pompous as ever, that these creatures would perform as expected. We are not circus clowns, says Nerissa, glaring at Rockefeller so much he actually blanches. If I had known you had plans to detonate such a device, I never would have risked it. Such blood would have caused a frenzy, and none of us might be standing right now if it hadn't been for these reformed creatures. She turns to Vivian and offers a wan smile. Truly, your restraint is quite admirable. Well, no one died, says Mr. Rockefeller, puffing his chest and no doubt offended that this young woman is scolding him so, unwilling to give the compliment to the monsters. And it will be the talk of the town. Every scar will be a story. I told you they were the real deal, the old woman says, jutting her finger at the Lamia. But would anyone believe me? No, of course not. No one actually thought it would work, another says. We've never had such beings in our presence like these. And that was quite a show, the old woman says with a laugh, gaze perusing every inch of Nerissa's body. I still can't believe what I'm seeing. That tail, what are those, made out of, if I may ask? Rockefeller asks hesitantly. Nerissa seriously considers devouring the man whole and enjoying the look on Vivian's face as she does it, when Christabel answers for her. You absolutely may not ask. As it is, I am beyond appalled at your behavior. First, our guests have been told that it was a pair of errant coffee urns that went ballistic, but I promise you that if such an event happens again, we will not be able to cover it up so easily. We are fortunate that the house is so decorated in so much red velvet, Christabel continues. Secondly, this is the Villiers home, and our presence has ushered in $1,000 in damage. All press is good press, the old woman says. Nerissa finds this a disgustingly American concept. For all the wrong reasons. I will have to undertake a letter writing campaign and work to pull every string available to ensure this does not happen again. If anyone crosses, you know the consequences, Miss Crane says, with the authority of a politician or a preacher. We have much, much larger issues at hand. Unexplained deaths, mysterious disappearances. If we prattle on long enough, whatever stalks us now will have plenty of time to eviscerate us, and shame on us only. Well, now, Nerissa can certainly understand what Worth sees in this mortal. She is commanding, though small. Rockefeller frowns and turns away from her, and then Christabel regards the three unusual beings, as she so aptly put it, with a bright smile as she can manage. For a slight thing of no more than 20, it's impressive. She lights up the room. Even Nerissa has to admit to that. We are imploring you for help, Christabel says sweetly, looking Nerissa straight in the eyes. No small feat. Many men have wet themselves upon seeing them, blood red and streaked with green as they are. Mr. Goodwin was intended to ask you first, before any other methods were. She takes a deep breath, steeling herself against the stupidity of her cohort. I fear we have made so grave a mistake in this misstep that there is no going back. Vivian finds her voice at last, but it is far away, strange thing. She knows on one layer of her emotional consciousness that she is the best person in matters of discussion with human beings. Worth is too forgiving of them, and Nerissa too distrustful. But she is still too shocked and thrown off by the scent of blood to react as quickly as she once did. We have seen far worse, she says at last, which is far from the truth. They have been surprised a few times in their long years together, but never once in public with such an audience. Truly, the level of stupidity exhibited by these specimens is far beyond the pale. Crane. She just respects the woman under all her layers of disgust. Something familiar about her. The way she talks, that matter. But why? The circle of Iapetus, what nonsense. It's been a long time since she stumbled her way into a mortal cult, and she never much liked them to begin with. Such a sad sartorial palette with dark robes and tacky headdresses. They're just very excited to see you as you are, Christabel says, though there is no thrill in her voice. In fact, judging by the response, Vivian has the distinct feeling that she is more or less unimpressed. You will pardon their staring. Our order has studied your kind for a long time, and seeing you as you are is rather delightful. Usually she likes it when they stare, Worth says dryly. Vivian ignores him. You could have simply come for tea. In that case, the likelihood of human dismemberment would have been significantly diminished. Yes, I realize that now, except these good people here wanted proof. And while I hoped for a more toned down reveal, courtesy of Mr. Goodwin, that did not go as planned, Christabel continues. Now she's smiling and it's hideous, and Vivian hates it, especially the way that Worth is looking at her. Why does the woman have to be so clever and pretty? The combination is too much to bear, really. Was this beast not good enough for them? Asks Vivian, gesturing to Worth. To his credit, he does not rise to the bait. Vivian decides that she cannot spend another moment in such a state, and so she shivers slightly and rearrays herself more acceptably. The dress she can do little about, but a bit of mist and some frost about her middle make a good enough facsimile to cover the barest parts of her body. Unlike Nerissa, she is limited in her transformations, but she does the best with what she has. This, of course, elicits some expressions of awe from the limited audience, which helps Vivian regain her composure, shattered as it has been. Her fear does not manifest as one might expect. It is really more of a simmering rage, though colder than the deepest Siberian snow. It is good to bask in awe, and it helps soothe her. The attention more fully on her is akin to a lizard sitting in the sun. Direct application without shade is preferred, and Christabel is in danger of being the pesky tree in the way. Since no one is saying anything, Vivian tucks one of her loose tresses up into the twist atop her head. Well, since you all went through this trouble and have not only outed us both, but sincerely mortified us in the presence of our peers, I suppose this must be very important. For the first time, Christabel looks unsure. She draws herself up to her full yet somewhat limited height and says, Yes, The circle of Iapetus was begun as a joint venture between my great grandfather and his paramour, carried on her afterward only through her children, but also through their progeny. There's a great deal to consider in the woman's words, but Vivian begins to put it together. Now I know who you remind me of, Vivian says, extending a long finger toward Christabel. She does not quite touch her cheek, but just close enough, letting the long nail linger just a moment past discomfiture. You're a Van Tassel. And a Crane. Great-grandmother ensured that there was no mistaking where her firstborn was from, Christabel sighs. But that part of the story is so often left out. It's easier to believe it was just a bully after all that won in the end and not poor Ichabod. But they were all changed that day. My father argued for the better. Through Katrina and her husband knew the identity of their firstborn's father. They kept it a secret for a generation until the family was sufficiently moved. This is all very impressive, Nerissa says, clearly feeling to the contrary. But you've gone and destroyed any semblance of cover we had. Our hope was simply to live our lives in peace, and now that is quite impossible. We will have to leave. No, no, please, Mr. Rockefeller says. It is of the utmost importance that you hear us out. Lives are at stake, more than have already been spent. Nerissa has never been in a situation that, once revealed, people actually wanted to continue to remain in close proximity to her. A young woman, in fact, is looking rather admiringly at Nerissa's scales, an occurrence which has certainly not happened in all her long life. She was made by whatever mad god or goddess or happenstance to be the very opposite of what humans desired. But she supposes there is one in every crowd. We are an ancient order, revived from the Romans, Mr. Rockefeller says, clutching his chest. He pulls out a small amulet with a flame-wreathed hammer upon it. The symbol of our order, a secret order. We have ever guarded the flame of our mortality. The symbol is made of iron, which of course makes Nerissa's teeth ache. Clever. They know just enough to be dangerous. A literal flame? Nerissa asks, still unconvinced and, truth be told, growing a bit bored with the pageantry. How ancient could this order be? Well, no, says Christabel. Perhaps once there was, that brought by the son of Iapetus, Prometheus. You see, we are the intercessors between the realm of the supernatural and the realm of the mortal, the fey and the grey, as you call it. My great-grandfather Ichabod was a lifelong scholar of witchcraft and the occult, and was able to reshape the circle before his untimely death. You will have to clarify that at some point, Vivian points out wryly. No doubt she has her own version of what happened in Sleepy Hollow. But that is a diversion. This wouldn't have anything to do with the presence I just felt before the explosion, would it? Something dark and reaching. Yes, says Rockefeller. It appears whenever we're together, drawn by our very presence, it seems. A true sign of our favored state, I believe. The first time it showed up, it killed Lord Dunbreen, his body a mangled mess afterward. Thankfully, Christabel recognized the mark, brave girl as she is. Her parents, you see, are also victims. We are quite used to the pain of carrying the burden of the flames, says the old woman. We all carry scars. She holds out her hand, the blood still crusting across her papery skin. The creature didn't hurt anyone tonight. That was the result of your ballistics and sincere lack of judgment, says Nerissa. It seems you may have confused monsters. Now the humans are thoroughly upset. They all begin talking at once, and Worth is trying to say something, but instead, they just all end up speaking over one another and going red in the face. Vivian catches Nerissa's eye a moment and gives her a rare but tired smile. It has been a very long time since they saw one another face to face this way, and the circumstance is both embarrassing that they were captured in such a way that they almost begin laughing at the same moment. But no, they need no words. For the moment, they will let everything play out as it should. You do not have to help, says Christabel, but it might be prudent. You're going to tell us that you've got some relic of a weapon known to destroy people of our ilk, and if we don't help you, there will be a price, Nerissa says, taking a step closer to Christabel. To the girl's credit, she does not move, though every last one of the other humans does. Nerissa continues, or perhaps you will think to blackmail us, to out us to the public. You can be certain we have seen worse, and we will not be bowing to your requests. She is very proud of her little speech. It's not often that the words align themselves so rightly in her mouth, but as Vivian appears incapable of speaking for herself, and Worth appears lost as ever, she decides it's up to her. But that's when she sees a smile on Christabel's lips. You see, the young woman says, while there are a number of people of your abilities, though admittedly few in this general area, the decision was to reach out to you and your companions was quite beyond my power. Nerissa knows right away that something is amiss, and that something is almost certainly Vivian. They have not always lived together, and there are very large gaps in their friendship, whilst they were arguing or falling out of line or simply sick of one another. And a big gap coincides precisely with this insane business about Ichabod Crane and the beginning of this circle of Iapetus nonsense. Humans and their asinine cults and clubs and religion. It's enough to make Nerissa jump at them and bite their heads off. The inclination is so strong, in fact, that she licks her lips and takes a step forward, or rather tries to, when one of the younger men puts his hand on what is presumably a hidden dagger or firearm. So lacking in creativity, these people. But she cannot summon her power. Nerissa realizes that the circle of Iapetus has, indeed, made a circle around the three esteemed creatures of advanced ability, and they are all holding their amulets, and it seems to have an impact on them all. Worth looks as if he's going to vomit, and Vivian looks absolutely deflated. How did such a thing happen so fast? Just enough iron, just enough blood. Vivian, Nerissa says, tell me you don't know anything about this. Vivian is not the one to respond. It is, of course, Worth. My dear, Vivian knows everything about this. She's the one who started it, after all. Don't you recall, my dear? It was a glorious winter. Thank you for listening in. That is chapter 3. I will come back with chapter 4, The Times That Break, at another time. So thanks so much. My mouse has stopped working. There we go.